I mean, think it's all taken care of, but this is something that keeps persisting. So I look like a beat up prize fighter, but we're happy again to have my friend Cliff Kincaid on from America's Survival. Cliff, are you there?
I'm here, Pete. Good to be with you again.
Yes, and we talked a lot, and I won't be praising Cliff as much as I did yesterday, but he's a longtime culture warrior, a longtime conservative, and really a journalist going way back. We both worked together, both worked for the great Reed Irvine, who was one of the first guys to actually boldly take on the liberal media bias. And Cliff, I want to pick up where we left off yesterday. Before I do anything, I want to say we did some criticism of Trump yesterday, and it was appropriate stuff. For example, his sort of taking gay marriage, so-called, off the table. But Cliff, thinking about Trump, to me, I think his major contribution, which should last conservative politics for decades, I hope, is his forthright criticism of the media, even mocking the left-wing media bias, which, as one of the most out there publicized media critics in the world yourself, I mean, you must have loved that part of Trump, the part where he actually made the media with its far left bias an issue and used it to build his own political power.
Pete, he did touch a nerve, and let's be honest about how this came about. It's because of Reed Irvine, the founder of Accuracy in Media back in 1969, that so many people are skeptical and dubious of what they see, read, and hear, and why they are receptive to Trump's criticism of the fake news media. It was Reed Irvine, through AIM, that laid the groundwork for this skepticism, this effort to monitor and correct the major liberal or mainstream media. He laid the groundwork, really, Pete, for the advent of conservative talk radio. And I think Trump is riding this wave because there's literally millions, tens of millions of people out there who don't rely on the big broadcasting networks, the big newspapers. They're going for alternative sources of news and information like the show here.
Absolutely, Cliff. And it's ironic, 50 years ago today, same as with the Stonewall Revolution, Reed Irvine, and you're right, he was the one who took on the media. He did it with facts. He did it with reporting of his own. I mean, he took on the giants of his time, and that was back when there was not this assortment of alternative media, and so it was even more important. And then following on him, where the Media Research Center sort of systematized it more, and but it was and that Brent Bozell, but they learned from Reed Irvine.
They did, and I was with AIM on an off basis in some capacity or another for almost 40 years. I have to caution people, Accuracy in Media today is not the AIM that we knew, that we worked with Reed on for many, many years. Unfortunately, it's deteriorated under Reed's son, who's totally mismanaged the organization. But the fact is that because of this work in the past, people increasingly are skeptical of what they see, read, and hear. I said it laid the groundwork, Reed's criticism did, for talk radio. It also laid the groundwork for Fox News. And you and I know that Fox News has served a purpose. It's filled a void. The problem is that Fox, while it's conservative on some issues, has bent over backwards, sorry about that use of that phrase, to please the gay rights movement. They hire openly gay anchors like Shepard Smith. They have lesbians like Tammy Bruce on the air, quote, conservative gay Christians like Guy Benson. And they don't have people like you or me on anymore. They don't have the ex-homosexuals on who can talk about how unnatural and even deadly to one's health the homosexual lifestyle is. So we, as true conservatives, you and I, Pete, we have to keep the pressure on, continuing the work Reed Irvine did on even, quote, conservative outlets like Fox.
Yeah, and you brought up, we talked about the continued guests are bringing on the gay conservatives, and I think this is a huge issue for Christians, because you're right. I mean, it's a two-edged sword. Fox News. On the one hand, Fox News. I don't know if Trump would have got elected without a Fox News. I don't know. Maybe another media would have filled that void, but it plays an incredibly powerful role. But the flip side is, being based in New York City, Cliff, we went to New York City. It's one of the gayest cities in the world. We went to the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, which you alluded to yesterday, which is the homosexual so-called, they try to say it's a professional organization for gay journalists. The problem is it's also an activist organization. It pushes the pro-homosexual, pro-LGBT narrative within newsrooms. And Fox has given, I think, $10,000 a year. I don't know, what does Fox Business News also give money to NLGJA, Cliff?
Yeah, Fox Business Network, Fox News. And let me make this clear. You and I don't object to homosexuals working for any of these outlets. That's not the point. The point is hiring them, having them come, quote, out of the closet and promoting the lifestyle on the air. And then Fox News and Fox Business actually contributing money to this activist group, the Gay and Lesbian Journalists Association, in effect taking one side of the debate. And that's just wrong. That's not correct. That's not ethical journalism behavior.
Yeah, because, Cliff, we know how it works. What we're talking about is homosexual advocacy or activism in the newsroom, because we've seen it now. We've gotten to the point in many news stories where they don't even have, on homosexual or LGBT issues, they do not even have a critic from the other side. Now, that's something that's changed only in maybe the last 10 years, where they'll have stories that look like they were now written by GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, the media homosexual activist group. You see stories now, Cliff, that look like gay press releases.
And this kind of attitude has also infected the so-called conservative movement, including the Conservative Political Action Conference. We've talked about this. Last year, Brian Kamaker's group, Mass Resistance, was actually banned from even having an exhibit at CPAC. Yeah. And you tried to get in. You were told no. I was denied press credentials to cover the organization's CPAC event. This year, I know you didn't even try to get in, and neither did Brian. I did this time get press credentials to cover the event, but I went in there, and by the way, CPAC was far smaller this year than it was last year. And they had the so-called log cabin gay Republicans there. There was even out in the hallway so-called transgender conservatives. And then Marxist Van Jones, who has tried to censor and suppress conservative speech, was actually invited to CPAC as a speaker on the subject of so-called criminal justice reform. This is not the way to promote the conservative movement, by selling out.
Right. And Cliff, I went through the program, the CPAC program, and the sessions, et cetera, and what there was, well, there certainly wasn't anything dealing with the LGBTQ issue. I think there was something about the family. There was a time at conferences like these where there would be a panel on homosexual so-called marriage. There would be something on this issue. There was I think there was one pro-life session, Cliff, but there wasn't a lot on life. What we're seeing is the conservative movement tilting heavily now towards libertarianism. And we know that first of all, libertarians, a lot of them don't care about this issue, don't care about certain social issues. But what really offends me is when libertarians aren't even libertarian, they're not consistent. I mean, the homosexual agenda advances by government power. When you see these efforts to ban reparative therapy, which is basically talk therapy, they lie about it. They make it sound like, you have some gay activists calling it ex-gay torture, which is preposterous. Guys like Joe, my God, who's a blogger, Joe Jervis, calls it ex-gay torture. This is just manipulation, and they're using government power to ban people from getting pro-heterosexual, pro-normative help through talk therapy. Now, that's a big government agenda, Cliff, but I don't know about you. I haven't seen libertarians and institutions like Reason Magazine coming out and saying how dangerous those laws are because they just don't care about this issue.
There was one panel I didn't attend, but I saw it on the agenda of CPAC that dealt with, quote, strengthening the family. I saw one of the scheduled speakers was a great conservative named Alan Keyes, who you remember, Pete, was at our conference held by America Survival Inc. on cultural Marxism several years ago. You spoke at that event as well. Our website, by the way, you can sign up for a newsletter and contribute at usasurvival.org. Let me be clear, though, but before I go back to CPAC and this character they had on, who was also on the Mark Levin show, Brandon Straka. Let me make clear about the Trump administration. We have been critical of them not going far enough, but I've got a section in the book we did together, Pete.
Yeah, hold that book up, Cliff, again. This is our book on Obama.
Obama's Permanent Revolution, available through Amazon.com. It's a great book. Pete contributed a big chapter. In here, I mentioned, to its credit, the Trump administration did rescind the Obama-era letter designed to allow boys into girls' bathrooms. And President Trump has tried to implement a transgender ban and reverse Obama's policy of paying for transgender surgeries in the military. And I mentioned, while the Pentagon did not officially celebrate LGBT Pride Month in June of 2018, a Department of Defense LGBT group held an event along with a Pride happy hour at a local bar. So there is some progress being made.
Yeah.
Let me go back to CPAC for a moment, because while there was this panel on strengthening the family, and a great American, Alan Keyes, was there. Remember, Alan Keyes had actually ran against Barack Hussein Obama when Obama ran for the Senate the first time from Illinois.
Right.
And it was Alan Keyes who had the guts to call out Obama even then, before he was president, as a Marxist. But what troubled me, and has troubled several of our friends and associates, is that CPAC gave a whole platform to somebody named Brandon Straka, who's said to be the head of something called the Walk Away movement, of people who have walked away from the Democratic Party. Well, he may have done that. That's true. They gave him a big speaking spot there at CPAC, but he was up there advertising and promoting the fact that he's a homosexual. And so he hasn't walked away from that lifestyle. And then I thought,
Cliff, let's stop there a sec, Cliff. Let's play some of that thing you sent me from Facebook, Jared. Pull it up. This is Brandon Straka. I guess what is it, a year ago, one of his events. I mean, when you lie with homosexual advocates, you do get some crazy stuff. Play that clip, Jared. Yeah, the first Facebook one. This is Brandon Straka. Cliff, this is something that's on his Facebook page.
Well, I just did a Google search. It's called Resist, a Rock Revolution. And he apparently is the central character in this production.
Yeah, go ahead and play that, Jared.
We starve, look at one another short of breath, walking proudly in our winter coats, wearing smells from laboratories, facing a dying nation, a moving paper fantasy, listening for the new lies, with supreme visions of lonely tunes. Somewhere inside something there is a rush of greatness. Who knows what stands in front of our lives? I fashion my future on films in space. Silence tells me secretly everything.
Okay, that's good, Jared. One thing you said on Mark Levin, Cliff, was Strika said on Mark Levin, he's having these walk away events for Black Americans, and he's also going to have a series of events for LGBT people. Now, here's the issue, Cliff, and this is what we've talked about many times. It's one thing, we'll welcome anybody to vote for a conservative candidate, for a Republican candidate, for whoever they want. And that's one matter. But it's quite another matter when Republicans now, despite their pro-family platform, start openly endorsing all things LGBT. And that's the danger of movements like this. When you got Mark Levin, who's got a very conservative reputation, giving his whole show to basically what he would say is a conservative gay activist. I mean, you're going to get a lot of promotion within conservatism of the idea that homosexuality is normal and acceptable, and that's not a conservative message.
Yeah, and look, maybe I'm just not into this rock revolution stuff. Maybe there's an audience for that, but you can't but think that this hairstylist who did the rock revolution, I assume it's the same Brandon Straka, and now is doing the walk away movement, is just looking for a new gig, looking for a new job, and he's found something that's caught on. I'm not doubting his sincerity. Maybe he is sick and tired of the Democratic Party, but and good luck to him. But to invite him to CPAC as a so-called conservative, when he continues to promote his own questionable lifestyle, I find fault with.
Yeah, and it's what comes with the whole package, and that's why you're seeing now many more Republicans than you would have said 5 years ago who are saying, look, the gay marriage issue, that's over. I mean, people are saying you got to choose your battles, and that's not one. And the problem is, Cliff, is that the so-called gay conservatives become they're in the front of the revolution to normalize the behavior among the other half of the population. And so I would say, what's that?
Hey, can I get a little input here? I was preaching on the corner.
Who's this? Is this Jeff?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I was preaching on the corner, and this guy come over and says, "I'm a Republican, and what you're preaching on is hate." So I'm just giving an example: the persuasion of even the politics to change public opinion, and it's coming across where they're being infiltrated. Now, there's a video done by Bradley Dean. You ever heard of him?
Yeah, Bradley Dean.
He goes to high school, right? And he did a video in 1987. It was the Homosexual Manifesto, and it says and he read it, and it said, "We'll be in your churches, we'll be in your political parties, and so forth." So this is
and that's something that's we'll do a whole show on that because that's a very interesting manifesto. But Cliff, this is what's happened to the party. This happened to the Conservative Party in the UK, in Britain. It ultimately became a party that became a gay activist party as, quote, conservatives. And I think there are a lot of people who want to turn the Republican Party into that same thing here in the United States.
I think that's true. And the sad thing is that, and again, maybe this guy Straka is sincere. Maybe he's just gone through various phases of his life. I don't know. Maybe he's found the gold mine here in the walk away movement, and he's changing minds and bringing in big bucks. But look, CPAC has been burned on this kind of thing before, and you and I know. I think it was 2 years ago when I was monitoring CPAC and its left-wing direction. CPAC invited this Milo, how do you pronounce his last name? Giannopoulos, who was supposed to be another gay conservative. He was going to be a featured speaker at CPAC. And then I think it was about a week or two before the actual event, some old recordings surfaced of Milo talking about how he had been molested as a child by a homosexual, but he spoke about it in positive ways. In other words, almost seemingly condoning man-boy sex. And this embarrassed CPAC. They immediately canceled his appearance. His book was canceled as a result. I mean, how do we know this isn't going to end up in another big fiasco?
Well, and people who would have followed Milo at all would have known that he was, not exactly conservative in approaches when he would go to speak on college campuses, and he would talk very, unbelievable, vulgar stuff. Now, and so what we're talking about, folks, is discernment. And Cliff, I want to switch over, and since we've only got you for the 10 more minutes here, and we're happy to have Cliff Kincaid support him, go to his website at usasurvival.org, usasurvival.org. And there's lots of great stuff there. He just does a lot of work on cultural Marxism, and he's politically incorrect even within the conservative movement. But Cliff, I want to read, since you've been following this longer than actually the whole movement as long as I have, I'm going to read from a book called After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. Now, this was a sort of a media manual written by two homosexual activists, Marshall Kirk and a guy named Madsen, and I'm just going to read the 10 principles, and I want you to give some commentary on this. This is a book they wrote on how to change, basically use the media to promote the normalcy of homosexuality in the culture, and actually they use the word desensitize, to desensitize the American people to the idea that homosexuality is wrong and a perversion. Okay, here's their 10 principles, Cliff. This is back in 1989. Number 1, don't just express yourself, communicate. So talk eloquently about gays and about homosexuality. Number 2, appeal to in other words, don't just be radical protesters. Start talking, get the conversation going. Number 2, appeal to the ambivalent skeptics. Number 3, this is a big one, Cliff, keep talking about gayness. In other words, the more you talk about homosexuality, being gay, coming out of the closet, the more you talk about it, the more acceptable it becomes, because people, they start saying, well, it's being talked about. Number 4, keep your message focused. The issue is homosexuality. Number 5, this is a huge one, Cliff, portray gays as victims, not as aggressive challengers. And they still use that to this day, even though people are losing their jobs practically because they oppose a gay marriage or something. It's still always in the media, it's the homosexuals who are always the victims, and now the transgenders. Number 6, give potential protectors a just cause. In other words, make straights the protectors of gays. Number 7, make gays look good. We know the media is all about that, Cliff. And number 8, make victimizers look bad. And of course, who are the victimizers, Cliff? It's the Christians, the Christian right, the evil Christians who are opposing, who are bigots and homophobes. That's what they laid out in '89, Cliff, and it worked pretty darn good, didn't it?
I think the strategy has paid off. And the origins of this, in terms of being a subversive force, go way back. Yesterday, I mentioned the founder of the modern gay rights movement, Harry Hay, a member of the Communist Party. They always viewed homosexuality and the homosexuals as another wedge to create conflict, to undermine traditional values. But, as we point out in our book, in my section at least, Pete, in this book, we go into a phenomenon that occurred at the founding of the Russian communist state, the Russian Revolution of 1917. It was called queer communism. And I actually quote in the book how the communists not only used homosexuality for their own purpose, they incorporated it in their mentality, and how over the years, in some of the biggest spy scandals of history, such as the Cambridge Five in Britain, you talked about how Britain's gone haywire, even the Conservative Party. Some of the major spy scandals, such as the Cambridge Five, several of those notorious spies from Moscow were homosexuals. And one can argue that homosexuality has proven to be one of the greatest subversive forces in undermining the West, Britain, now the United States, in history.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey, Pete, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, Cliff, this is in relation to Solinsky's rules for radicals?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, no, that what I read, Jeff, was I read from a book called After the Ball, which is they're using Solinsky tactics. But that was
That's
just
what I'm
a,
referring to.
yeah,
Well,
they were two
Alinsky,
homosexual
remember,
activists.
Alinsky is just a relatively modern day version of Karl Marx. It was Marx who devised what was called dialectics, and this is the ability to create conflict and mislead and confuse people. Homosexuality is part of that, but Van Jones, one of the most prominent Marxists, who was a featured speaker at CPAC, is really, and he's funded by George Soros. He's a CNN commentator. He's an expert at this. They figure out how to manipulate homosexuals, blacks, minorities. I mean, now the homosexuals are being subdivided into various categories. That's where you get this LGBTQIA, intersex.
Yeah.
It's constant. It's what we call in our book here. This is really about dialectics, the permanent revolution. It never ends until
Right.
we totally destroy the established order, and that means, as Pete has referred to it, the criminalization of Christianity in the United States. That's where it's going.
Yeah, Cliff, I mean, you must, and we're running out of time here, but, you know, they're always moving forward aggressively, and it seems that we're always backing up. Do you have any answers for how that can be changed so that we're not always, I mean, now it's I call it the outrage factor. We're always reacting to the latest outrage, and yet they keep gaining, because now I think a Gallup poll showed it was well into the 60s now, I think 65%, and that's a couple of years ago, of people who now supposedly support the legalization of same-sex so-called homosexual marriage. Cliff, that would be a huge number. I don't really think that's where it is, but
No.
do you have any ideas for how we can get back on offense against this movement, which always has us playing defense?
Well, you have to go back to basic principles. You can call them biblical principles, but they're secular principles as well. What I was brought up on in the Boy Scouts of America, when the Boy Scouts of America were really the Boy Scouts of America, and that was be morally straight. Do we have to define that for people? And the problem is, when you give them a little ground, you give them ground, and they take even more. This is why it's
Exactly.
a revolution. I mean, this is why nothing ever satisfies them. There are some conservatives who think, well, we'll just give up on homosexuality, fight them on transgenderism. Well, that's not going to work. And then you got some who say, well, let's just legalize marijuana. But we talked yesterday, now they want to legalize cocaine and LSD. I mean, it never ends. And then you got Kamala Harris, the senator from California, who is running for president. She talked the other day about decriminalizing prostitution. In some cities in the United States today and in Canada, the government actually pays for centers where addicts can go in at taxpayer expense and shoot up with heroin. So
Yeah.
they want to use, as you pointed out earlier, Pete, they want to use the power of the state to force others to accept their lifestyle and even pay for it. And when they get sick, such as in HIV/AIDS, we've got to pay for the health care to take care of them.
Well, yeah, and you were one of the few people who criticized even when Trump mentioned HIV/AIDS in his State of the Union speech. It's not that we don't want people to get help for HIV, but when you look at the disproportionate funding, government funding for that disease. I mean, Trump could have said the same thing. Instead of saying HIV/AIDS, he could have said Alzheimer's. That affects far more Americans
we have
than
to
this.
Go back,
Yeah.
Pete, to basic principles. And look, some people are innocent victims of these diseases. I understand that. But in many of these cases, these diseases are being brought on by their own lifestyle. We've got to tell these people, don't engage in dangerous sexual conduct.
Which they'll never do, Cliff. We know that. I mean, our own CDC, our own Centers for Disease Control. I mean, they talk a lot about homophobia and stigma. The one thing they don't do is say, don't practice homosexual sodomy. If they did that, there would be, a revolt among all the gay activists who who work within the government. I mean, that's the one thing they will not do, Cliff. And in fact, they do the opposite. They're actually trying to say, make the blood supply, which you've written on that as well. Well, let's just make it totally equal so that there's no delay at all for a homosexual giving blood. I mean, Obama already lessened the penalty now, but that didn't satisfy them. As you said, it's always more. Now you have gay activists saying, hey, look, we should have, if a homosexual man who goes and wants to give blood, that should be just like you giving blood, Cliff. And the problem with that is that the homosexual lifestyle is linked disproportionately to a number of diseases, and that's the reason there are these special rules for men who have sex with men giving blood.
That is, and we've just got to remain true to first principles, be living lives that are morally straight. I mean, think about what we've learned about tobacco and cigarette smoking. Is the solution to that to say, well, go ahead and smoke, just use menthol cigarettes or use a filter? No, we say stop. Don't do that. Right. You're going to get cancer. And with regard to these other diseases and lifestyles, we've got to be true and honest and say stop.
Right. Well, Cliff, thanks for coming on again. We appreciate it. And you're absolutely right. We have to get back to first principles. And that starts with conservatives. It starts with Christians. No, there's no such thing as gay positive Christianity, gay positive Catholicism. There's no such thing as a queer conservative movement. That's an oxymoron, folks. I mean, because sexual morality matters. And there are boundaries that God has set up, and that reason applies to if men have sex with other men, that leads to the spread of diseases. That is not something upon which you can build a healthy society, and it must be something that is not encouraged and discouraged, even by the state. And so, folks, we're here with Cliff Kincaid. I encourage you to go to his website, USA Survival, support him, support Americans for Truth. You can give right up at the top there. There's a button to support our efforts to get people like Cliff Kincaid out there. A guy like Cliff Kincaid will not be on Fox News probably the rest of his life, even though he has a lot to teach people, because there is political correctness now, even within the so-called conservative movement. We are against that. We want to get the truth tellers out there. Cliff, thanks for all you do. Thanks for being on. Go to his website, USA Survival, and help him out and support us as well. Cliff, thanks a ton for being on.
Good to be with you. I hope you feel better, Pete.
Thanks, guys. I hope to be back on the tube quick after my skin heals. But once again, we are Americans for Truth about homosexuality. Support us. And remember always, folks, it's your duty to support the truth. Shame on us if we are more timid in defending truth than homosexual and transgender activists are in supporting their movement, which is built on one lie after another lie. We'll see you here tomorrow. Thank you for watching Americans for Truth Live.